The concert hall fell silent as Professor Vivian Ashford, known as the most exacting piano instructor at Berkshire Academy, stepped onto the stage with the kind of gaze everyone had learned to fear. It was an autumn evening in Massachusetts, and the chandelier lights sparkled against the nearly $500,000 Steinway grand piano positioned center stage. This was the Academy's most important annual fundraising event, where Boston's wealthy and powerful gathered to display their generosity and assess the talent of the younger generation. But none of them were prepared for what was about to happen. Vivian stood before the microphone, her perfectly styled blonde hair cascading over the shoulders of her elegant black dress. She was only 32, but had already achieved what many dreamed of their entire lives. Trained at the Vienna Conservatory, performed at Carnegie Hall, and now the cornerstone of the music program at one of America's most prestigious academies. Her voice rang out clear and confident to the point of arrogance. "I have a challenge for everyone tonight," she said, a thin smile playing on her lips. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, First Movement. Anyone who can play it perfectly without a single error, with all the emotional depth this work demands. She paused, letting the silence stretch another beat. "I will marry that person." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. People thought this was a joke, an entertaining way to open the program. But those who knew Vivian Ashford, those who had studied under her exacting hand, saw that her eyes held no hint of jest. She was deadly serious. And in the darkness at the corner of the room, standing beside his cleaning cart, a man in a navy blue janitor's uniform suddenly froze, his hand gripping the mop handle. No one noticed him. No one ever did. But in his deep brown eyes, something was awakening after years of slumber. What happened next would change everything. Vivian Ashford was not an easy person to understand, and she preferred it that way. Since the age of 5, when her small fingers first touched the piano keys in their Back Bay mansion in Boston, music had been the only language in which she felt completely comfortable. Her father, a successful Wall Street investor, demanded perfection in everything. There was no room for mediocrity, no forgiveness for lack of effort. And Vivian had delivered. She exceeded delivery. At 12, she won her first national piano competition. At 15, she was accepted into the advanced program at the Vienna Conservatory, one of the world's most prestigious music schools. She spent 6 years in Europe, absorbing classical music culture, studying with masters, performing in historic concert halls where the great composers had once played. Mozart, Beethoven, Chopin, Brahms. These names weren't just history to her. They were companions' souls she felt closer to than the living people around her. When she returned to America at 26, she brought a reputation and an impressive collection of awards. Berkshire Academy, one of New England's most prestigious private schools, had courted her with an offer few young teachers could refuse: a professorship, complete freedom in curriculum design, and a salary that made many colleagues envious. But what Berkshire couldn't buy was her heart. Over the past 6 years, Vivian had 3 serious relationships. All 3 ended the same way. The first man was a conductor from the New York Philharmonic, talented and passionate. But he couldn't understand why she spent 5 hours each day practicing a passage he thought was good enough. The second was a Harvard literature professor, intelligent and charming, but he couldn't grasp the difference between playing music technically correct and playing music with soul. And the third, a successful architect, had proposed to her in a 5-star restaurant with a glittering diamond ring. She had refused, not because she didn't love them. She did in her way. But they didn't understand her. They didn't understand that music wasn't her job, wasn't her hobby. It was her essence. And if someone couldn't understand, that couldn't share that language with her, How could they truly know who she was? So she had built a wall. She demanded perfection from her students, not just because her father had taught her that way, but because it was how she protected herself. If she set the bar high enough, no one could cross it. And if no one could cross it, she never had to face the risk of opening herself up. Tonight's challenge wasn't a joke or theater. It was a statement. It was her telling the world, "Prove to me you're worthy. Prove to me that somewhere out there, there's a soul that can understand me." She didn't expect anyone to step forward. She didn't think that in a room full of wealthy people, talented students, and faculty colleagues, there would be anyone capable of playing one of the most difficult and emotionally demanding piano works ever written. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 wasn't just a technical exercise. It was a journey through despair, hope, passion, and redemption. Sergei Rachmaninoff wrote it after overcoming deep depression, and every note carried the pain and joy of a man who had looked into the abyss and found his way back. To play it perfectly required not just skill, but understanding of suffering, of loss, of rebirth. And Vivian believed very few people could understand that. She stood there on stage, the lights highlighting her sharp features, and she felt a strange satisfaction seeing the confused faces in the audience. They didn't understand her. They never had. But at least tonight, she had laid down her terms. She had drawn the line. And now all she had to do was wait to be proven right. Elijah Carter knew he was invisible. After 8 years working as a janitor at Berkshire Academy, he had gotten used to that feeling. People looked through him as if he were part of the furniture. A chair, a table. A 33-year-old man in a navy blue uniform with Elijah embroidered on the chest pocket, pushing a cleaning cart through the gleaming hallways of one of the nation's most elite educational institutions. He didn't complain. This job paid enough for him to rent a modest 2-bedroom apartment 3 miles away, where his 8-year-old daughter Sarah had her own room with purple walls she had chosen, and posters of the female artists she admired. This job came with health insurance, crucial when you're a single parent. And this job gave him the hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. when the building was empty and quiet. When he could breathe, when he could remember, when he could, in the darkest hours of night, slip into the concert hall and sit before the Steinway Grand and let his fingers touch the keys he once thought would be his entire world. But that was his secret. And secrets needed to be kept. Elijah Carter hadn't always been a janitor. Once in another life, he had been called a prodigy. He grew up in Dorchester, a neighborhood of Boston that not many people from Berkshire Academy even knew existed. His mother worked as a nurse at the local hospital, working night shifts to support him and his younger sister after his father left when he was 6. Money wasn't abundant, but love was. And music was always there. When he was 8, an elementary school teacher recognized something in him. She heard him singing in music class and noticed he had perfect pitch. She convinced his mother to let him take piano lessons at a community program funded by a nonprofit aimed at bringing music to children in underserved areas. Elijah's first teacher, Mrs. Morrison, a silver-haired black woman retired from the Boston Symphony Orchestra, looked into the boy's eyes and said, "You have a gift, and we don't waste it." Elijah practiced as if his life depended on it. While other kids played basketball on the streets, he sat on the worn stool in their small living room, working through Hanon exercises, Clementi Sonatinas Bach preludes. His hands flew across the keys with an ease that made Mrs. Morrison shake her head in amazement. "You don't just play music," she told him one day. "You feel it. That's something that can't be taught." At 16, Elijah won a full scholarship to the Boston Conservatory, one of the nation's top music schools. He stepped into a completely different world. Suddenly, he was surrounded by students from wealthy families, people who had pianos in their homes, since they could walk, who had studied with renowned masters, who spoke about concerts in Paris and Vienna, as if they were talking about going to the grocery store. Elijah felt like he didn't belong. But when he sat at the piano, all of that disappeared. The piano didn't care where he came from, what he wore, or what his parents did. The piano only cared about what he brought to it. And Elijah brought everything. It was his second year at the conservatory when he met her. Her name was Grace. Grace Williams. She was a violin student with warm brown eyes and a smile that made him feel like he had come home. They met during an ensemble rehearsal, and there was something in the way their music blended that created something undeniable. They loved each other the way only young artists can love completely passionately, without fear of tomorrow. They spent hours in practice rooms, him playing piano, while she drew her violin creating music meant only for two. They walked along the Charles River at sunset, talking about their dreams. He wanted to become a concert pianist. She wanted to play in a major symphony orchestra. They would perform together, travel the world, share their music with everyone. But life had other plans. In Elijah's fourth year, 3 months before graduation, Grace told him she was pregnant. They were only 22, they weren't ready. But when they looked into each other's eyes, they knew they would make this work. Grace's family disagreed. They were wealthy from Newton, one of Boston's most affluent areas. They had plans for their daughter, and those plans didn't include a poor boy from Dorchester, no matter how talented. They cut off all financial support. They told Grace that if she married him, she would no longer be their daughter. Grace chose Elijah, and Elijah had to make his own choice. He couldn't continue at the conservatory with full costs while supporting a family. His scholarship only covered tuition, not living expenses. He needed real money, rent money, healthcare money. He needed a job. So, 3 months before graduating with a degree in piano performance, Elijah Carter dropped out. He found work in construction, then in warehouses, then in janitorial services. Whatever paid. He and Grace married in a small ceremony at the city courthouse, her family absent. His mother was there, full of pride and sadness in equal measure. Sarah was born on a beautiful spring morning, and Elijah held his tiny daughter in his arms and felt that what he had lost no longer mattered. This was his purpose now. This was his music. For the next 5 years, they built a life. It wasn't the life they had dreamed of, but it was theirs. Grace worked part-time teaching violin to children. Elijah had moved to working at Berkshire Academy as a janitor, a job with better benefits and more stable hours. Sarah grew up happy, surrounded by love and music. Every night before bed, Elijah would play a short piece for her on the old keyboard they had bought from a thrift store. And then, on a rainy November night 5 years ago, everything changed. Grace was driving home after a student recital. A drunk driver ran a red light. She died at the scene. Elijah remembered the phone ringing at midnight. He remembered the police officer saying words that made no sense. He remembered feeling like the floor had opened up and swallowed him. He remembered Sarah, 3 years old, standing in her bedroom doorway, eyes wide, asking, "Where's Mommy?" How do you explain to a 3-year-old that her mother will never come home? The months that followed were a blur. Elijah's mother moved in with them, helping with Sarah, while Elijah tried to figure out how to continue. He went to work every night, going through the motions, cleaning hallways and classrooms, while his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't play piano. Every time he looked at it, he saw Grace. He heard her laughter, her voice, the music they had made together. It was too painful. So he stopped. For 5 years, Elijah Carter didn't touch a piano. The keyboard in their apartment collected dust in the corner. Sarah sometimes asked why Daddy didn't play anymore, and he would find an excuse. Busy. Tired. Later. Sweetheart. But 6 months ago, something changed. He was cleaning the concert hall late one night, as he did every night when he heard it. A student had left a recording playing from the speakers. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. He froze, mop still in hand. The music washed over him. It was Grace's favorite piece. It was the piece playing when he proposed to her at a simple picnic by the Charles River. He stood there in the darkness, listening, and for the first time in 5 years, he felt something other than pain. He felt connection. He felt her, and that night after he finished his work, he walked into the concert hall. He sat on the piano bench. His hands trembled as they touched the keys, and he began to play. At first his fingers were awkward, having lost skill from years without practice. But then muscle memory began to return. Chords formed, melodies flowed, and Elijah cried as he played, tears streaming down his face in the empty room, playing for the woman he had loved, for the daughter they had created, for the life they should have had. Since that night, he had played every night, from 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. When he was certain the building was completely empty, he would slip into the concert hall and play. He played through every piece he had ever known. He played new works. He played the pieces Grace loved. And slowly, piece by piece, he began to feel whole again. But he never told anyone. Not his mother, not friends, not even Sarah, though he suspected she suspected something. One morning she had asked him, "Daddy, why do you smell like the music room?" He had laughed and said, "I clean it every night, honey." But this morning when he dropped her off at school, Sarah had looked at him with those serious eyes too old for an 8-year-old. "Daddy, she said you should play piano again, for real. Mom would want that." And now standing in the concert hall on this gala night, his uniform damp with sweat from cleaning Elijah, heard Vivian Ashford issue her challenge, and all he could think about was Sarah's voice this morning. Mom would want that. Elijah had planned to stay in the background. He had planned to let the event unfold, do his work in silence as he always did. And then after everyone left, he would enter the concert hall and play in the darkness where no one could see him, no one could judge him, no one could know the secrets he kept. But when Vivian spoke those words, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto, No. 2, something in him awakened. This wasn't just any piece. This was their piece. His and Grace's. It was the piece she had cried upon hearing for the first time, telling him it was the sound of hope after despair, of light after darkness. It was the piece playing in her car when he knelt down with the cheap ring he had saved 3 months to buy. It was the piece she played a recording of in the hospital when Sarah was born, wanting their daughter to enter the world with beautiful music in her ears. And now this woman, this arrogant piano teacher he had observed from afar for months, was using it as some kind of game. As a challenge to prove she was better than everyone, that no one could meet her standards. Something in him ignited. He thought about Grace, about the hours they had spent practicing this concerto together. She had loved the first movement, how it started with deep, heavy chords, like the voice of fate, before exploding into the main melody full of yearning and passion. "It's like Rachmaninoff is talking to God," she had said once. "He's asking, Why must I suffer? And then he's answering himself, because through suffering, I find beauty. Elijah had practiced this concerto hundreds of times during his years at the Conservatory. It was one of his signature pieces, the work his professor said would open doors to his career. You play Rachmaninoff unlike anyone I've ever heard, his professor said. You don't just play the notes, you live in them. He still remembered it. Every note, every phrase, every nuance. During 5 years of not playing, he thought he had lost it. But in the past 6 months, when he slipped into the concert hall, he had worked through it again. No sheet music, just memory and emotion. And he knew he could play it. But knowing and doing were two completely different things. Elijah looked around the concert hall. It was filled with people he could never hope to be part of their world. Businessmen in expensive suits, women in designer dresses glittering with diamonds, Berkshire Academy faculty in their professional attire, and the students, these privileged kids who had grown up with every opportunity he never had, standing at the side with their phones ready to record whatever happened next. If he stepped out there, they would laugh at him. They would look at his uniform, at his skin color, and they would make assumptions. A janitor thinks he can play Rachmaninoff. That's the funniest thing they've ever heard. And if he failed, if his fingers trembled, if he forgot a passage, if all those missed years meant he had lost his skill, he wouldn't just be the janitor anymore. He would be the laughingstock. He would be the man who overreached, who thought he was better than his station. He could lose his job. How would he support Sarah? But then he remembered his daughter's words this morning. Mom would want that. And he knew she was right. Grace never played it safe. She was the one who told her family she would marry the man she loved regardless of what they thought. She was the one who encouraged him to pursue his music with all his heart, never holding back. Music isn't something you do, Elijah, she had told him once. It's who you are. And if you hide it, you're hiding your soul. He had hidden his soul for 5 years. Perhaps it was time to let it see the light. Elijah looked up at the stage. Vivian still stood there looking out at the audience with that thin, confident smile. She didn't think anyone would try. She was enjoying this moment, her superiority. And that finally was what made Elijah Carter make his decision. Not for himself, not to prove anything to this woman, but for Grace, for the music she loved, for their memories, for their daughter who needed to see that her father was more than a janitor, that he was a man with history, with talent, with soul. He set his mop down and carefully leaned it against the wall. His hands trembled slightly as he stepped out of the darkness at the corner of the room. He could feel every eye turn to him as he walked toward the center aisle. The whispers started immediately. Is that the janitor? What is he doing? Oh my God, is this a joke? Elijah kept his head straight as he walked down the aisle. Each step felt like 10. The lights from overhead seemed hotter, brighter. He could feel sweat forming at the back of his neck under his uniform collar. His work shoes scuffed and practical echoed on the polished hardwood floor. He didn't look to either side. If he did, if he saw their faces, their doubt and amusement, he might lose courage. So he kept his eyes on the stage, on the Steinway Grand, waiting there, the lights making its glossy black surface glow. Vivian saw him approaching, and her expression shifted from confusion to irritation. She stepped toward the microphone, her voice sharp through the speakers. "Sir, I think there's a misunderstanding," she said, her voice polite, but with an edge. "This is a private event." Elijah stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to the stage. He looked up at her, and for the first time since he started working at Berkshire, he truly looked into her eyes. They were blue eyes, cold and beautiful like ice. "I know what it is, ma'am," he said, his voice deeper and warmer than hers. "I work here. I've cleaned this room every night for 8 years." A wave of nervous laughter ran through the audience. Vivian's jaw stiffened. "Then I'm sure you have work to get back to," she said. "This event will be over soon." "Not before your challenge is answered," Elijah said. Silence dropped through the room like a stone into still water. Vivian raised an eyebrow, her expression a mixture of disbelief and something that looked almost like offense. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Are you saying you want to try playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2? Yes, ma'am?" Laughter burst from several spots in the audience. One of the students yelled out, "This has to be a prank!" Phone cameras began recording. Throughout the room, people were leaning forward, unable to believe what they were witnessing. Vivian crossed her arms, looking down at Elijah with something like pity. "Sir," she said, her voice now with forced patience. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is one of the most difficult works in the piano repertoire. It requires years of studied technical skill at the highest level and a deep understanding of music theory and emotion. It's not something just anyone can sit down and play." "I know what it is," Elijah said quietly. "You're a janitor." The words hung in the air, clear and cutting. Now no one was laughing. The atmosphere in the room had shifted, becoming uncomfortable. Even those who had found the situation amusing now felt that something was wrong with this exchange. Elijah held her gaze. "Yes, ma'am. I'm a janitor. But before that, I was a student at the Boston Conservatory. And before that, I was a kid who thought music could save him. And tonight, just once more, I want to remember what that felt like." Something flickered in Vivian's eyes. Something beyond irritation. Curiosity, perhaps. Or doubt. "Boston Conservatory," she repeated. "When I attended from 2011 to 2015, I didn't graduate. Why not? Life happened." Vivian studied him for a long moment. The audience was completely silent now, everyone waiting to see what she would do. He could see her calculating, weighing options. Part of her wanted to dismiss him outright to protect her challenge and her authority. But another part, the artist part of her, seemed curious. Finally, she uncrossed her arms. "Fine," she said. "But let's be clear about this. You have one chance, one mistake, one wrong note, and you stop immediately. I won't have my piano disrespected. I understand. And when you fail, because you will fail, you go back to your work and we never speak of this again. Agreed?" Vivian stepped aside, gesturing to the piano with a sweep of her hand. It was generous and dismissive at once, like a queen granting audience to a peasant. Elijah climbed the stairs. Each step felt surreal. The stage lights were much brighter than he had imagined. He could see every face in the audience now, some sympathetic, some skeptical, some openly mocking. He spotted a faculty member he recognized, a history teacher, who always said thank you when Elijah cleaned her classroom. She was looking at him with something like hope. The piano waited for him like an old friend. He approached it slowly, respectfully, the way he always approached the instrument. This wasn't just an object. This was a voice, a soul, a bridge between the player and the divine. He pulled out the bench and sat. The leather was soft beneath him, worn smooth by countless musicians. From this position, he could see the entire concert hall spread before him. Faces staring back, judgment in their eyes. Vivian stood to the side of the stage, arms crossed again, her face unreadable. Elijah looked down at the keys. They gleamed under the stage lights, white and black keys in their perfect pattern, unchanged for centuries. Bach had touched keys like these. Beethoven, Chopin, Rachmaninoff himself, and countless others whose names weren't remembered, but whose music had mattered. He raised his hands, hovering them over the keys. They were trembling slightly. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each beat resounding in his ears. There was no turning back now. He closed his eyes, and in that darkness he saw her. Grace. She was standing by the Charles River, in that sundress she wore the day he proposed, wind lifting her hair, her smile lighting up his world. He heard her voice, soft and warm. Play, Elijah. Play with your heart. That's all anyone can ever ask. He opened his eyes. He let his hands drop to the keys, and he began. The opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 are like the voice of fate itself. They are deep, resonant, heavy with drama and foreboding. They demand attention. They declare that something significant is about to unfold. Elijah struck those chords with every ounce of emotion he had been holding inside for 5 years. Sound filled the concert hall, instantly rich and powerful. The Steinway's voice was magnificent, better than any instrument he had ever played. Each note rang out with clarity and depth that made his spine tingle. The audience's reaction was immediate. Laughter died. Smirks faded. People who had pulled out phones to record what they thought would be embarrassment now found themselves recording something completely different. Because from the very first chord, it was clear this wasn't a janitor pretending to play piano. This was a pianist. Vivian's expression changed in the space of 3 seconds. Her arms, which had been crossed in dismissive confidence, slowly uncrossed. Her mouth, which had been set in a line of superiority, parted slightly, and her eyes, cold blue ice, widened. Elijah didn't see any of it. His eyes were closed again, and he was somewhere else entirely. He was back at the Conservatory, age 19, practicing this piece for the first time. His professor, Dr. Mendelssohn, standing beside the piano, speaking in that gravelly voice. Rachmaninoff wrote this piece when he was emerging from depression. He thought he had lost his gift. This piece is his answer to darkness. Remember that. Every note you play should carry that weight. He carried that weight tonight. The opening statement, the repeating chords that announced the concerto, gave way to the first theme. This is where technical skill becomes crucial. The melody weaves through different registers, demanding both power and delicacy. The left hand holds the rhythm steady while the right hand dances through the melody. Elijah's fingers moved across the keys as if they had never stopped. Muscle memory, powerful and reliable, took over. But it was more than muscle memory. It was emotional memory. Every time he had played this piece, he had poured a piece of himself into it. And now, after years of silence, all of those pieces were rushing back. He thought about Grace, about how she would sit beside him when he practiced listening with complete concentration. "I can hear your soul when you play Rachmaninoff," she once told him. "It's like you're speaking a language I can't hear anywhere else." The first page of the concerto passed. No errors, no hesitation. In the audience, a faculty member who specialized in music theory leaned over to her colleague. "He's incredible," she whispered. "His technical skill is conservatory level." "Higher." Her colleague nodded, stunned. Where has he been hiding? Students who minutes before had been laughing were now completely silent. Some had tears in their eyes, though they couldn't explain why. There was something in the way this musician played that transcended notes on a page. It was raw, honest, vulnerable. One student, a pianist herself, turned to her friend. "He's not just playing notes," she whispered. "He's telling a story." And she was right. Elijah was telling a story. A story of love and loss, of dreams and sacrifice, of a man who had everything and lost it and somehow found a way to keep going for the sake of a daughter who depended on him. As the first movement progressed, the complexity increased. There are passages in Rachmaninoff where both hands must move independently, creating two separate musical lines that somehow interweave to form a single unified statement. It requires years of training, extraordinary coordination, and deep understanding of the composer's intention. Elijah navigated these passages like they were second nature. Vivian had moved closer to the piano, drawn by what she was hearing. Her professional skepticism was crumbling. She recognized mastery when she heard it. This man wasn't good. He was exceptional. But more than technical prowess, there was something else. There was soul. She had spent her career chasing perfection. Every note precisely placed. Every dynamic marking observed with absolute accuracy. Every tempo indication followed to the letter. She had won competitions, earned praise, built a reputation on her flawless execution. But listening to this janitor, she realized something. She had been playing music correctly. He was playing it truthfully. There's a difference. The concerto's first major climax was approaching. This is where many pianists struggle. It requires tremendous physical strength to produce the volume needed while maintaining musical integrity. Hands must cover an enormous range of the keyboard, leaping from deep bass notes to high treble, sometimes in the space of a single measure. Elijah's hands flew across the keyboard. Sweat was forming on his forehead now, but he didn't wipe it away. He couldn't. His hands couldn't leave the keys. The music was demanding every ounce of concentration, every bit of skill he possessed. The audience was leaning forward. Even those who knew nothing about classical music could sense that something extraordinary was happening. A security guard standing at the back of the hall, a veteran who had worked at Berkshire for 20 years, found himself with tears streaming down his face. He had known Elijah since he first started. They sometimes talked during breaks. Elijah had never mentioned music. Never once. All those years, the security guard whispered to himself. All those years, and he never said a word. As the first major section concluded, Elijah opened his eyes for the first time since beginning. He needed to see the keyboard for the upcoming passage, a technically demanding run that covered nearly the entire range of the piano. For a brief moment, his gaze met Vivian's. And in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, respect. And from Vivian, for the first time in her adult life, something approaching humility. She had challenged the world to prove her wrong. This man was doing exactly that. Vivian Ashford had heard Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 hundreds of times. She had performed it herself twice once, at age 21, at her graduation recital from the Vienna Conservatory, and once 2 years ago at Carnegie Hall. She owned dozens of recordings. She had studied every major interpretation from Vladimir Horowitz's legendary 1940 rendition to contemporary performances by pianists like Yuja Wang and Denis Matsuev. She thought she knew this piece intimately, but standing on that stage, listening to a janitor in uniform unleash this piece with every fiber of his being, she realized she had never truly understood it. He had reached the moderato section, now the slower passage that follows the opening allegro. This is where the concerto shifts from drama to something more introspective, more personal. The tempo slows. The volume drops. And the pianist must navigate territory where every note is exposed, where there's nowhere to hide technical flaws or emotional emptiness. This is where the soul of the pianist is laid bare. Elijah played this passage with such tenderness that Vivian felt something crack inside her. She thought about her father, about how he had stood over her when she practiced as a child, pointing out every mistake, every imperfection. Again, he would say whenever she made the smallest error, "From the beginning. And this time, make it perfect." She had learned to make it perfect. Every note in the right place, every pause exactly measured, every crescendo precisely controlled. But in chasing perfection, had she lost something essential? Elijah's playing wasn't perfect in the technical sense. Vivian's trained ear caught a couple moments where the voicing could have been more balanced, where the sustain pedal was held a fraction too long. But these microscopic imperfections did nothing to diminish the impact of the performance. If anything, they made it more human, more real. She watched his hands on the keyboard. They weren't the hands of a concert pianist anymore. They were rougher, calloused from years of manual labor, nails cut short and practical. But the way they moved across the keys carried the memory of thousands of hours of practice, years of dedication, a lifetime of love for music. A memory flooded back to her. She was 24 back in Vienna, recovering from a particularly brutal review in a music journal. The critic had praised her technical skill, but noted that her performance lacked emotional depth and human warmth. The words had stung. She had gone to her mentor, Professor Steinberg, in tears. "He doesn't understand," she told him. "I played every note perfectly." Professor Steinberg, an elderly man who had studied under students of Brahms himself, had looked at her with a sad smile. "Vivian," he said gently, "perfect notes are not the same thing as perfect music. To truly move an audience, you must be willing to be vulnerable, to show not just your skill, but your humanity, your pain, your joy, your uncertainty. Audiences don't come to concerts to hear perfection. They come to feel connected." She had dismissed his words at the time. Vulnerability felt like weakness. Perfection felt like armor. But now, listening to this man, she understood what Professor Steinberg had meant. Elijah reached a passage that Vivian particularly loved, a moment where the melody seems to suspend in air, held by single, sustained notes, while harmonies shift underneath. It's a passage that requires not just technical control, but understanding of how silence and space function in music. He played it like a prayer. And Vivian realized her eyes were wet. When had she last cried at a concert? She couldn't remember. She attended dozens every year, always analyzing, always critiquing, always maintaining professional distance. Music had become an academic exercise for her, a puzzle to solve, rather than an experience to feel. But this janitor, this nobody, was reminding her of why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. She glanced out at the audience. They were completely transfixed. Phone cameras were still recording, but people weren't looking at screens. They were watching the performer, watching the story unfold in real time. Several students were crying openly. Faculty members sat with expressions of wonder. Even the donors, wealthy business people, who normally treated these events as social obligations, seemed genuinely moved. And Vivian realized he was succeeding where she had been failing. He was reaching people. The performance continued. Elijah navigated through the middle section of the first movement, where the piano and orchestra, absent tonight, but implied in the piano part, engage in dialogue. Even without orchestral accompaniment, he managed to suggest the presence of other instruments through the way he shaped phrases and balanced the voicing. Vivian's professional mind couldn't help but analyze. His tempo choices were sometimes unconventional, but always musical. His dynamic range was impressive, from whisper-soft passages to moments of crushing power. And his phrasing, the way he shaped musical lines, showed deep understanding of the structure and intention of the composition. But beyond technical analysis, there was something else happening. Something she didn't have vocabulary to describe. He was channeling something. She could see it in his face. His expression shifted with the music reflecting every emotional turn. When the melody soared, there was a hint of hope in his features. When the harmonies darkened, pain flickered across his brow. He wasn't performing music. He was living inside it. And the audience was living inside it with him. Vivian thought about her challenge, about how she had stood on stage and said, essentially, "Prove you're worthy of me." What incredible arrogance. This man didn't need to prove anything. His talent, his soul, his humanity, all of it was evident in every note he played. And here she had been treating marriage like a prize in a competition, as if love was something to be won through technical achievement. She thought about the 3 men she had turned away. What if one of them had loved her with the kind of depth this musician clearly felt for whatever had inspired this performance? What if she had been so busy evaluating the perfection of their technique that she missed the truth of their feeling? The piano sang out another phrase, and Vivian felt like it was speaking directly to her. "You've been looking for an equal," it seemed to say, "but you've been looking in the wrong way. You've been measuring skill when you should have been measuring heart." The moderato section was building now, gradually intensifying as it prepared to transition back to faster, more dramatic material. This is a delicate balance. The pianist must increase energy and tempo without making the shift feel abrupt or unmusical. Elijah managed it beautifully, with patience and control that suggested deep familiarity with the piece. Vivian found herself wondering about his story. Boston Conservatory, he had said. Why had he left? What had happened to turn a promising young musician into a janitor, working night shifts? There was history here, pain that she could hear, resonate in every phrase, and she wanted to understand. For the first time in years, Vivian Ashford was curious about another person, not as a competitor or colleague, but as a human being. She glanced down at her hands, perfectly manicured, blemishless. They had never known hard labor. They had been protected, pampered, designed for the sole purpose of making music. They were perfect instruments. But somehow, looking at Elijah's work-worn hands creating magic on the keyboard, she felt hers were inadequate. Because his hands had lived. And music, true music, requires life experience, not just technical training. The performance was entering the final third of the first movement now. The most demanding material was still to come. The cadenza section, where the pianist plays alone, showcasing both technical prowess and interpretive vision. This would be the ultimate test. Vivian had heard countless pianists attempt it. Most survived it through sheer determination. Few mastered it. Almost none made it seem effortless. She watched Elijah's face, saw the hint of apprehension there. He knew what was coming, and despite the confidence he had shown so far, there was still fear. Fear of failure. Fear of exposure. Fear that after all of this, he might not be able to pull it off. Vivian surprised herself by hoping he would succeed. Not just succeed. Excel. Because if he did, it would mean something she had believed for years was wrong. It would mean that greatness could exist outside prescribed paths, outside conservatories, and competitions outside the world of privilege and access. It would mean that soul mattered more than credentials. And if that was true, everything she had built her identity upon would need to be reconsidered. Part of her found that terrifying. But part of her, a part she had long ago buried beneath layers of perfectionism and pride, found it thrilling. The music swelled, hands flew, and Vivian Ashford, for the first time in her adult life, allowed herself to be taught by someone she had initially dismissed. It was the most humbling moment of her life. And the most important, the cadenza was approaching. Elijah could feel it coming like a storm on the horizon. His heart was pounding now, and not just from the physical exertion of the performance. He was approaching the section of the concerto that had always challenged him even in his prime at the Conservatory. The cadenza is where the composer steps back and allows the pianist to speak alone. No orchestra, no harmonic support, just pure solo piano. In Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto, the cadenza is massive sprawling, requiring extraordinary technical facility and absolute command of the keyboard. He had 6 months to rebuild his skills in secret playing in the darkness of the concert hall during early morning hours. But 6 months after a 5-year gap wasn't the same as constant practice. Doubts crept in. What if his fingers couldn't keep up? What if he forgot the structure? What if after everything he failed right at the moment of greatest challenge? But then, as the music led him to the threshold of the cadenza, a memory returned to him with such clarity that it nearly stopped him in his tracks. He was back in their tiny apartment 3 years into marriage with Grace. Sarah was asleep in her bedroom, and Grace was sitting on the worn sofa 8 months pregnant with her belly huge, listening to him practice at the second-hand keyboard they had managed to afford. He was struggling with this same cadenza, frustrated by his inability to make it sound the way he heard it in his head. "I can't do this," he had said, his hands falling to his lap. "It's too much. I've lost it." Grace had struggled to her feet with the effort pregnancy required and came to stand behind him. She placed her hands on his shoulders. "Elijah," she said softly, "you're thinking about notes. Stop thinking. Just feel. That doesn't make sense. I need technique for this. Pure technique." "No," she insisted. "Technique gets you onto the stage, but heart keeps you there." Rachmaninoff wrote this when he was coming out of darkness. He was remembering what it meant to hope again. Play that. Play hope. He had looked back at her confused. She smiled, placing her hand over his heart. "When you proposed to me, what did you feel? Everything. Terror and joy and hope and love all at once. That's what this section needs. All those feelings at once. Life isn't one emotion at a time. It's all of them competing, overwhelming. Play that." Sitting now on the stage of Berkshire Academy, hands poised at the threshold of the cadenza, Elijah understood what she had meant. He wasn't playing notes. He was playing life itself. His hands descended, and the cadenza began. It erupted from the piano like a dam bursting. Notes cascaded in impossible torrents, right and left hands weaving independent patterns that somehow coalesced into a unified statement. This was music at the boundary of human capability, demanding fingers move with precision and speed that seemed beyond possible. Elijah's technical training flooded back. Hours and hours of scale practice, arpeggios, octaves, all those boring, repetitive exercises that build the foundation every pianist needs. They served him now, allowing him to navigate the treacherous landscape of Rachmaninoff's imagination. But it was more than technique. Every cascade of notes carried meaning. Descending runs were grief pouring out. Ascending passages were hope climbing skyward. Massive chords were resolve defiance, refusing to be broken. And the delicate moments in between were memories, fragments of joy that sustained through darkness. Grace. She was in every note. Their first date, walking through Boston Common in autumn, leaves crunching under their feet, talking about dreams they dared to dream. Their wedding standing in the courthouse in inexpensive clothes, making promises that meant everything. Sarah's birth holding the tiny life they had created, marveling that something so perfect could exist. Ordinary moments, Grace humming while cooking dinner, the way she laughed at his terrible jokes, how she looked sleeping in moonlight. And the final moment, the phone call from the hospital, the world ending in a single sentence, everything beautiful crashing into darkness. All of it poured through his fingers, translated into sound, transformed into something that transcended personal tragedy and became a universal statement about human experience. In the audience, people were no longer just moved. They were devastated. A woman in the third row, a corporate executive who prided herself on emotional control, sobbed openly, mascara running down her face. She didn't know why exactly, but the music was touching something deep in her, something about her mother who had died last year. About hours, she regretted not spending about love not expressed. A student in the back, an 18-year-old who thought she understood pain because she hadn't gotten into her first-choice college, realized she knew nothing about real loss. And strangely, instead of making her feel invalid, it made her feel connected. Everyone carries something, the music seemed to say. Your pain matters too. A faculty member beside the stage, a veteran teacher who had taught at Berkshire for 30 years, thought about her husband who had Alzheimer's, whose mind was slowly disappearing. She saw Elijah's face, the concentration and anguish there, and she understood. We all play our cadenzas. We all face moments where we must perform, alone, must find strength. We don't think we have, must continue even when it seems impossible. And Vivienne stood transfixed, watching Elijah attack the most demanding section with complete abandon. He wasn't protecting himself, wasn't holding anything back. He was giving everything. And in that vulnerability, in that absolute commitment, she saw what true artistry looked like. Tears streamed down her face without her realizing it, without caring who saw. Because she was witnessing something she had spent a lifetime searching for, and never finding a moment where a musician completely disappeared into the music, where the boundary between player and played dissolved entirely. This was what Professor Steinberg had meant. This was what she had been missing. The cadenza reached its apex, an impossibly fast passage that seemed to defy physics. Elijah's fingers were a blur, moving with speed that shouldn't be possible after 5 years away from the instrument. But muscle memory combined with sheer will and desperate need to express carried him through. The audience held its collective breath. And then, a sudden stop. Complete silence. 1 beat. 2. The resolution came softly, gently. After the storm of the cadenza, Rachmaninoff provides a moment of peace, like the eye of a hurricane. A single melodic line, simple and heartbreaking, emerges from chaos. Elijah played it with such tenderness that it felt like a lullaby. It was a lullaby. The lullaby he used to play for Sarah when she was a baby, when she couldn't sleep, when she cried for a mother she was too young to remember. Every night for 5 years he had sung her to sleep, his voice cracking with grief, promising her that everything would be okay, even when he didn't believe it himself. This moment in the music was that promise. After all pain, after all loss, there could still be gentleness. There could still be love. Vivienne's hand was over her mouth now, trying to contain the sound of her sobbing. She had never in her entire life been so moved by music. And it wasn't just the music. It was the story behind it, the humanity in it, the refusal to be defeated by tragedy. This janitor, this nobody had taught her in 30 minutes what every teacher she ever had couldn't teach her in years. Music isn't about you. It's about truth. The cadenza concluded, transitioning back into the final section of the movement. Elijah was exhausted now, physically and emotionally. Sweat soaked through his uniform. His hands ached. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when he was so close. The final pages flew by. Themes returned, transformed by the journey they had taken. What began in darkness was resolving toward light. Not easy light. Not simple happiness. But hard-won peace that comes from refusing to surrender, from choosing to continue, despite everything. The orchestra would normally enter again here, surrounding the pianist with a wall of sound. But playing alone, Elijah had to suggest that power use the intimate presence of the piano to become an entire ensemble. He did so brilliantly, his hands covering the entire range of the keyboard, creating the illusion of multiple instruments. And then the final build-up. Tempo increasing, dynamics swelling, energy mounting, everything pushing toward the inevitable conclusion. The final chords approached massive statements that require every ounce of strength a pianist possesses. Elijah gathered everything he had left and unleashed it. Bang, bang, bang. 3 final chords, each one a declaration, a refusal, a promise. I lived. I lost. I continue. The final note rang out, vibrating in the concert hall's perfect acoustics, sustaining in the air like a prayer. Elijah held it foot on the sustain pedal, letting it sing. And sing, and sing, until it finally reluctantly faded into silence. His hands remained on the keys, his head bowed, his chest heaving with effort and emotion. Complete silence filled the hall. Not a single person moved. Not a single person breathed. And then, applause exploded through the concert hall like a physical force, sudden and overwhelming. But it wasn't the polite charity clapping of a social event. This was something primal, uncontrolled. People leapt to their feet. Students, faculty, donors, all of them standing, clapping, many with tears streaming down their faces. The applause wasn't just appreciation. It was release, collective catharsis, recognition that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Elijah lifted his head slowly, like a man emerging from a dream. He blinked in the stage lights, disoriented, taking a moment to remember where he was. For the past 30 minutes, he hadn't been at Berkshire Academy. He had been somewhere else entirely, somewhere beyond time and place. He turned on the bench to face the audience, and his expression wasn't triumphant. It was humble, almost confused, as if he couldn't quite believe what had just happened. The standing ovation continued. People were shouting, "Bravo, incredible." Phone cameras everywhere capturing the moment for posterity, for social media, for the disbelief of friends and family who would watch the recordings later. Vivian stood rooted to the side of the stage, still crying, hands clutched together at her chest. She was supposed to be the arbiter here, the judge who determined success or failure, but she felt completely inadequate to the task. How could she judge something that had just fundamentally altered her understanding of art? Elijah stood slowly, his legs unsteady. He wiped his forehead with the sleeve of his uniform, a self-conscious gesture that somehow made the entire moment more real, more human. A student from the front row shouted, "You're incredible!" A faculty member called out, "Where have you been hiding?" The security guard at the back. Elijah's friend Marcus was openly sobbing, shoulders shaking, not caring who saw. And amidst all the chaos, Vivian began walking toward the piano. The applause continued around her, but it faded into the background as her focus narrowed to a single point. This man, this musician, this teacher, she hadn't known she needed. She reached him at the piano, and they stood face to face for the second time that evening. But everything was different now. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice rough from crying. In the din of applause, only he could hear her. Elijah met her eyes, and for the first time there was no deference in his gaze, no automatic submission to her authority. They were equals now, artists recognizing each other. "Just a janitor, ma'am?" he said quietly. "No." Vivian shook her head, her voice firmer now. "Who are you really?" Elijah hesitated, then answered simply. "My name is Elijah Carter. I'm a father, I'm a widower, and I used to be a musician a long time ago." "Used to be." Vivian's voice cracked. I've never heard anyone play like that. I had good reasons for playing tonight." "What reasons?" He glanced out at the audience, still applauding, still standing, and then back to her. "My wife. She loved this piece. She's gone now, but tonight felt like a way to honor her. Something in the delivery of those words. The simple dignity in them broke something in Vivian that had been rigid for too long. "Where did you learn?" she asked, though he had already told her. She needed to hear more to understand more. Boston Conservatory. "I was a student there from 2011 to 2015. Piano performance major. I didn't graduate." Gasps rippled through portions of the audience that could hear the conversation. Students were recording everything, catching every word on phone cameras that would make this conversation viral by morning. Why, Vivian asked, "Why didn't you graduate? You should have been performing. You should have been..." "I made a choice," Elijah said simply. "My girlfriend Grace got pregnant senior year. Her family cut her off. Someone had to support us. Conservatory doesn't pay bills. Construction jobs do. Warehouse jobs do. And eventually janitor positions with health benefits do. You gave up everything." "I gained everything that mattered," he corrected gently. "I have a daughter, Sarah. She's 8. She's the reason I get up every day. Music was important, but she's essential." Principal Jameson of Berkshire Academy had made his way to the stage, now recognizing the moment required an institutional response. He stood at the edge, clearing his throat to get attention. "Mr. Carter." Principal Jameson said, his voice amplified by a microphone someone had handed him. "I've been principal here for 15 years. In that time, I've heard countless performances in this hall. Tonight was... I'm not sure I have words. Where have you been?" How did we not know Elijah turned to face the principal, suddenly aware of how many people were listening, watching, waiting for his answer. "I work here, sir. I've been cleaning this building for 8 years. Third shift 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Nobody really notices the janitor." Silence fell over the audience at that, an uncomfortable recognition of truth. How many of them had walked past Elijah hundreds of times without truly seeing him? "Why didn't you say something?" a faculty member called out. "Why didn't you tell us you could play?" Elijah was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Because it wasn't relevant to my job. And because, after my wife died 5 years ago, I couldn't play anymore. It hurt too much. Only recently did I start again late at night when the building is empty. I play for her. I play for my daughter. I play for myself. I didn't play to be heard." "But you played tonight," Vivian said, her voice soft but carrying. "Why tonight?" Elijah looked at her, really looked at her and answered with complete honesty. Because you were using music I love as a test, as a way to prove nobody was good enough for you. And it felt wrong. Rachmaninoff didn't write this to build walls between people. He wrote it to break walls down. He wrote it when he was broken and finding a way to be whole again. That's what this piece means, and I needed you to understand that. The words hung in the air, both indictment and invitation. Vivian felt like she had been slapped and embraced simultaneously. Every word he spoke was true, and the truth hurt because it exposed everything she had been doing wrong. She had used music as a weapon of exclusion. He had used it as a language of inclusion. She had played to prove superiority. He had played to share humanity. She had been searching for a perfect match. He had been honoring imperfect love. "I'm sorry," she heard herself say the words, surprising her even as they left her mouth. Apologies weren't something Vivian Ashford offered easily. Elijah seemed surprised too. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," she repeated louder, now turning to face the audience. "I stood on this stage tonight and made a challenge rooted in arrogance. I thought I was testing skill. Really, I was protecting my ego. I've spent years building walls, convincing myself that nobody could meet my standards. And you," she turned back to Elijah, "you walked through those walls like they were paper." She took a breath, steadying herself. "You play with something I've lost. Or maybe something I never had. You play with a heart that has truly loved and truly lost. I've been playing with a heart that has protected itself by never fully opening. And tonight, you showed me the difference." The media had started arriving now, local news crews having picked up on social media posts that something extraordinary was happening at Berkshire Academy's gala. Cameras were setting up at the back of the hall, reporters trying to piece together the story. A donor, a wealthy philanthropist who served on the Academy's board, approached the stage. "Mr. Carter, I don't know if you're aware, but video of your performance is already spreading online. You're going to be famous by morning." Elijah's expression shifted to alarm. "Sir, I don't want to be famous. I just wanted to play a piece I love one time where someone could hear it." "Well, millions are going to hear it now," the donor said, not unkindly. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Principal Jameson stepped forward. "Mr. Carter, I want to offer you a position. Our music program could use someone with your obvious talent, and I appreciate that, sir, but I have a job, and I have a daughter to get home to. She has school tomorrow, and I promised her pancakes for breakfast." The simplicity of the response created a ripple of surprised laughter through the audience. Here was a man who had just given the performance of a lifetime, and his first thought was breakfast with his daughter. Vivian found herself smiling through her tears. Of course, his first thought was his daughter. Everything about this man pointed to the same truth he had learned to prioritize what truly mattered. But then a student called out, "Wait, Professor Ashford, what about your challenge? You said you'd marry whoever played it perfectly." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Everyone had momentarily forgotten the original premise of the evening in the face of the extraordinary performance. Vivian felt every eye turn to her. This was the moment of truth. She could deflect, make a joke of it, pretend it had all been theatrical gesture. Or she could address it honestly, publicly, and with the integrity this man had just demonstrated. She chose honesty. "You're right," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I made a promise tonight, and Elijah Carter played that piece more than perfectly." She turned to him. "But I made that promise lightly, arrogantly, thinking nobody could do it. You proved me wrong in every way possible." She paused, gathering courage that performing had never required. "I can't offer marriage based on a foolish challenge. That wouldn't honor what you just shared, wouldn't honor the memory of a wife you clearly still love, wouldn't honor the kind of decision that deserves. But I can offer something else." She extended her hand to him. "Will you teach me? Not technically. I know technique, but will you teach me what you know about playing with soul, about letting music be truth instead of armor? Elijah looked at Vivian's extended hand, and for a moment, everyone in the concert hall held their breath. This was an unexpected vulnerability from a woman who had seemed invulnerable. Slowly, he reached out and shook her hand. The touch was brief, formal, but something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words. "I'd be honored, Professor Ashford," he said quietly. "Vivian," she corrected. "Just Vivian." Principal Jameson, sensing the moment, stepped forward again. "Actually, I'd like to make a formal offer now with the board's approval, which I'm certain I'll have by morning. Mr. Carter, we'd like to offer you a position as co-instructor in our piano program. You'd work alongside Professor Ashford, bringing your particular expertise to our students." Murmurs of approval ran through the faculty members present, and the principal continued. "I'd like to personally fund a full scholarship for your daughter to attend Berkshire Academy beginning next fall, if you're interested, of course." Elijah's expression shifted from shock to something approaching overwhelm. "Sir, That's incredibly generous, but I don't have teaching credentials. I didn't even finish my degree." "You just gave a masterclass in teaching," the principal said firmly. "Not a single person in this hall will ever forget tonight. Not because of technical perfection, but because you taught us something essential about what music means. That's better than any credential." A faculty member from the audience stood. It was Dr. Patricia Morrison, head of the Humanities Department, and she spoke with a voice that commanded attention. "If I may, Principal Jameson, I'd like to add something. Mr. Carter, I've been teaching here for 30 years. Every evening when I leave my classroom, I've seen you cleaning it. You've always been respectful, always been thorough. Once I left a stack of essays on my desk, and the next morning they were neatly organized instead of scattered. You didn't have to do that. You saw something out of place and you fixed it." She paused, emotion creeping into her voice. "I mention this because it illustrates something important. You bring care and attention to everything you do. That quality combined with your obvious musical gift makes you exactly the kind of teacher our students need. Someone who understands that excellence isn't about credentials or status. It's about dedication and heart." Applause broke out again, and Elijah looked genuinely moved, struggling to maintain his composure. A student from the audience, a young woman around 19, raised her hand. When called on, she stood, her voice shaking slightly. "Mr. Carter, can I ask a question?" "Of course. When you played tonight, it felt like you were telling a story. Like every note meant something specific. How do you do that? Professor Ashford teaches us technique, and we can play the notes perfectly, but it doesn't feel like what you just did." How do we learn that Elijah considered the question carefully before answering? "You live," he said simply. "You love people. You lose people. You fail and try again. You have moments where you think you can't go on, and then you find a reason to continue. All of that goes into the music, whether you want it to or not. Music is the language of emotion, and you can't speak it authentically if you haven't felt those emotions." He paused, then added, "But you don't have to wait for tragedy. You just have to be honest. When you sit at the piano, bring your real self. Not the version of yourself you think people want to see. Your actual self, with all the doubts and hopes and fears. Music has a way of revealing truth. If you're pretending, the audience will know. If you're real, they'll feel it." Another student, younger, maybe 17, spoke up. "Is that why you play late at night? So nobody sees you?" Elijah smiled sadly. "Partly, but also because that's the only time I have. After work, after making sure my daughter is settled, 2 to 4 in the morning, the building is quiet, and I can be alone with memories and music." "What do you play?" the student asked. "Everything. Bach preludes, Chopin nocturnes, Beethoven sonatas. Whatever speaks to me that night. Sometimes I play the same piece over and over, working through a feeling that won't leave. Other times I jump around letting the mood guide me. Vivian had been listening quietly, and now she spoke up, her voice thoughtful. How often have you been doing this, playing late at night? About 6 months regularly. Before that, I didn't touch a piano for 5 years. After Grace died, it hurt too much. Every time I tried, I'd think about how we used to play together, about the plans we had. The piano became a reminder of everything I'd lost. What changed 6 months ago? Vivian asked gently. Elijah's expression softened. I was cleaning like usual, and a student had left a recording playing. Rachmaninoff's second concerto, actually. Same piece we heard tonight. It was Grace's favorite. We used to listen to it together, and she'd tell me what she heard in it. Listen to how the melody yearns, she'd say. How it reaches for something just out of grasp, and then finally finds it. He wiped his eye quickly, almost embarrassed by the emotion. Hearing it that night, I realized something. Music wasn't a reminder of what I'd lost. It was a connection to what I still had. Memories of her, the love we shared. Every time I play a piece she loved, it's like she's there with me. So I started playing again. Not to perform, just to feel close to her. Complete silence had fallen over the concert hall. Even the reporters at the back had stopped moving, caught in the intimacy of this confession. The young student who had asked the original question had tears streaming down her face. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. The donor who had spoken earlier stepped forward again. Mr. Carter, I want to establish a scholarship fund in your wife's name, the Grace Carter Memorial Scholarship for Music Students. What you've shared tonight. Students need to understand that music is about more than career. It's about being human. Elijah looked overwhelmed. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, the donor replied kindly. Let her memory help other young musicians. Let something good come from your loss. She would have loved that, Elijah whispered. Yes, thank you. Vivian had been watching the exchange, and something in her expression suggested she was wrestling with an internal struggle. Finally, she spoke. I need to say something publicly. She turned to face the audience fully. Tonight was supposed to be about proving a point, about demonstrating that I had standards nobody could meet. It was defensive, insecure, and ultimately selfish. The courage in the admission was evident. I've spent my career pursuing perfection. I thought if I could just be good enough, play precisely enough, achieve enough recognition, I'd find what I was looking for. But watching Elijah tonight, I realized I was looking in the wrong direction. Perfection isn't the goal. Connection is. Understanding is. Humanity is. She looked at Elijah. You gave up your conservatory education to support your family. I pursued conservatory education to avoid family. You made a choice based on love. I made choices based on fear of not being exceptional. And yet you're a better musician than I'll ever be. That's not true, Elijah said immediately. Your technical skill is extraordinary. I heard you play last month in the faculty recital. I was cleaning backstage. You played Liszt's Transcendental Etudes, and it was flawless. Flawless, Vivian repeated. Exactly. Flawless and empty. Beautiful surface with nothing underneath. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. The comparison is obvious. You play like you're bearing witness to something sacred. I play like I'm trying to win a competition. Elijah shook his head. You're being too hard on yourself. We're just different. We've lived different lives, had different experiences. Your music reflects who you are, like mine reflects who I am. Neither is better or worse. They're just different voices. Wise and generous, Vivian said with a sad smile. Of course you'd say that. But I think we both know tonight revealed something I need to address. And the first step is admission I've lost my way. Principal Jameson interjected practical concerns arising. Regardless of philosophy, we need to address logistics. Mr. Carter, the offer stands. Co-instructor position, full benefits, and scholarship for your daughter. We can work around your current schedule, or you could transition to full-time faculty if that's preferable. Elijah looked torn. I need to think about it. This is wonderful, overwhelming, but I have to consider what's best for Sarah. Stability has been important for us after losing her mother. Of course, take the time you need. The offer won't expire. A media reporter from local news stepped forward, microphone ready. Mr. Carter, your story is remarkable. Janitor with hidden genius playing a concert that brings the house down, revealing years of secret practice. It's already going viral online. How does it feel? Elijah looked uncomfortable with the attention. Honestly, it feels strange. I'm not comfortable being the center of attention like this. I just wanted to play a piece I love. I didn't expect all of this. But you must have known you were good. I knew I used to be decent years ago. Didn't know if I still was. 6 months of late-night practice after a 5-year gap isn't the same as consistent training. The reporter turned to Vivian. Professor Ashford, your challenge has certainly created a memorable evening. Any regrets? Vivian considered carefully. I regret the motivation behind it. Pride and loneliness aren't good foundations. But I don't regret the outcome. Tonight changed me, challenged me in ways I needed. Sometimes we need to be humbled to grow. And the challenge itself, marriage to whoever could play perfectly. Vivian smiled genuinely this time. I think we've established that marriage isn't a prize to be won through performance. It's a partnership built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared growth. Those things can't be achieved in a single evening, no matter how extraordinary. She looked at Elijah as she spoke, and something in the exchange of gazes suggested that while marriage was off the table, something else might be beginning. Mutual respect, artistic kinship, perhaps eventually friendship. The student from earlier spoke up again. So what happens now? All this attention, viral videos, job offers. Your life is going to change, Mr. Carter. Elijah sighed, running a hand through his hair. The first thing that happens is I go home to my daughter and make her those pancakes I promised. Then we'll see. But whatever happens, Sarah comes first. That won't change. A faculty member called out. Will you play for us again? I mean, regularly, officially. If I take the position the principal offered, I suppose I'd have to, Elijah said with a small smile. But honestly, the idea of performing regularly makes me nervous. Tonight was a special circumstance. Playing for an audience is different than playing for myself. That's exactly why students need to learn from you. Dr. Morrison interjected. You understand the vulnerability of performance. Too many performers forget that fear is normal, that exposure is real. You haven't forgotten. Vivian added quietly. And perhaps you could teach me to remember that. I've performed so many times that I've forgotten to be nervous, forgotten to be vulnerable. Maybe that's part of the problem. The exchange between them was noticed by everyone present. Something was shifting walls, coming down, possibilities opening. But for now, in this moment, standing on stage with hundreds of eyes watching, Elijah Carter looked exhausted and overwhelmed and desperate to return to the simple life of being a father. If it's all right, he said, I really should go. My mother is staying with Sarah tonight, but I don't want to be out too late. She worries. The principal nodded. Of course. We'll be in touch tomorrow to discuss details if you're willing. I'm willing to talk. Elijah agreed. But I'm not promising anything yet. He turned to leave the stage, and applause erupted again, a standing ovation that felt different than the first one. This wasn't about the performance. It was about respect for a man who had maintained his priorities, who hadn't been swept away by sudden attention. Vivian caught his arm as he passed her. Elijah, she said quietly, using his first name for the first time. Thank you. For tonight. for teaching me, for being honest." "Thank you for the challenge," he replied. "I needed a reason to step out of the shadows." "Maybe we both did," she said, and in those words was an acknowledgement of something neither of them was quite ready to name yet. He smiled a genuinely warm smile that reached his eyes, and then he was walking off stage through the parting crowd, through flashing cameras, heading toward the exit and back to his life of being a father. Behind him, conversation exploded. Students and faculty and donors and media all processing what they'd witnessed, sharing theories and feelings and videos that were already racking up hundreds of thousands of views online. And Vivian stood alone on stage beside the Steinway, looking at the spot where the janitor had sat and created magic, and she understood that tonight wasn't ending. It was beginning. Her journey to rediscover what music meant, to rebuild her approach to art, to maybe eventually learn to open the heart she'd kept locked, was just starting. And strangely, she found herself excited about that. Nervous, yes. Uncertain, absolutely. But excited in a way she hadn't been in years. Because tonight, Elijah Carter had shown her something impossible, that there could still be room to grow. That the walls she'd built could come down. That the challenge she thought nobody could meet had been met, just not in the way she expected. And in meeting it, everything had changed. Week passed. The video of Elijah's performance had gone viral faster than anyone could imagine. Within 48 hours, it had 20 million views. National media had picked it up. Janitor's hidden genius revealed in emotional performance. Man who gave up dreams for family delivers performance of a lifetime. Arrogant professor, humbled by Janitor's piano skills. These headlines made both Elijah and Vivian uncomfortable for different reasons. Elijah's phone rang constantly. Talk shows wanted him to appear. Record labels wanted to sign him. Music schools wanted to invite him to teach. Someone even wanted to make a documentary about his life. He declined most of it. He agreed to one interview on local radio mainly to clarify misunderstandings and request privacy for his daughter. "I'm not a hero," he told the interviewer. "I'm just a man who had a special night. I'm still a father, still someone figuring out how to live after loss. Music helps me do that, but it doesn't define me. My daughter defines me." Vivian had also been requested for interviews, but she declined most. She accepted one with a prestigious music journal, where she could control the narrative. "I issued a challenge rooted in a terrible place," she said openly. Loneliness and fear masked as arrogance. "Elijah Carter showed me inadvertently that I had gone the wrong way. I'm grateful for that, though the way it happened was public and sometimes painful." During that week, she and Elijah had exchanged a few emails. Nothing romantic, just practical. Discussing the potential teaching position, how to make it work with his schedule, what it would mean for Sarah. But underneath the practical exchange, there was something else. Mutual respect. Curiosity. The beginning of a connection that both felt, but neither was ready to name. By the end of the week, Principal Jameson had organized a meeting with Elijah, Vivian, and key members of the administration. "We need to decide," the principal said. "Media attention won't last forever, but right now, Berkshire Academy has an opportunity to do something special." "Mr. Carter, are you still interested in teaching?" Elijah had thought about this all week. He had talked to his mother, who had encouraged him. He had talked to Sarah, who was thrilled at the idea of her father teaching music. And he had talked to himself at night when he sat in the concert hall, hands on the keys. "Yes," he said, "but with conditions. Name them. I don't want to be part of a show. I don't want to be wheeled out as the janitor who plays piano. If I do this, I do it as a real teacher, someone who has something to contribute to students, not a curiosity or a feel-good story. Agreed, the principal said immediately. And I want to continue some of my janitorial work. Not all of it, but some. I know that sounds strange, but that work keeps me humble. It reminds me that no work is beneath anyone, and it gives me time to think while my hands are busy. The principal and board members exchanged glances. It was an unusual request. We can arrange that, the principal said slowly. Perhaps you do a few hours of janitorial work each week, balanced with teaching. Would you be amenable to that? Yes. Then it's settled. We'll structure it as a hybrid position. You'll be a part-time instructor working alongside Professor Ashford, with some janitorial duties retained, if you wish. Salary, of course, will reflect the primarily teaching role with full benefits. Elijah nodded, and for the first time in the meeting, he looked directly at Vivian. And about working with Professor Ashford, I need to know if she truly wants this. I don't want to be part of a PR stunt or a way for her to look progressive. If we do this, it has to be a real partnership. Vivian had expected this question. She had spent the past week interrogating her own motivations. I want this, she said, her voice steady. Not for public relations. Not because I think it'll make me look good. I want it because you have something to teach me. About music, yes, but also about humility, about authenticity, about priorities. She paused, choosing her words carefully. This past week I've tried to play differently. Less focused on perfection, more on feeling. It's hard. It makes me feel exposed, unsafe. But it also feels like the first time in years I'm actually approaching why I loved music in the first place. She looked straight at him. You did that. One performance. 30 minutes. And you broke everything I thought I knew. I need to learn how to rebuild, and I think you can help me do that. Not as my teacher, but as a colleague. Someone I can learn with, not just learn from. Something in the air between them changed. The other board members could sense it, the subtle shift from professional to something more personal. Okay, Elijah said. Partners, not superior and subordinate, not teacher and student. Two musicians trying to figure out how to bring the best of what they know to students. Agreed. Principal Jameson smiled, clearly pleased. Excellent. We'll announce next week. And regarding your daughter's scholarship, Mr. Carter, we'd like her to start next fall if that works. Thank you, Elijah, said his voice thick with emotion. Sarah will be so happy. She told me she wants to go to school where Daddy works. As the meeting ended and others left, Elijah and Vivian found themselves alone in the office. So she said, suddenly feeling awkward and uncertain. Partners. Partners, he repeated. Then, with a small smile, this should be interesting. Interesting is one way to put it. Vivian paused. Elijah, I need to say something. Okay, about that challenge, about the marriage promise. I know the whole thing was ridiculous and arrogant, but there was a reason I said it. He waited, giving her space. I was lonely, she admitted, her voice small. I've been lonely for years. I built these high standards, these walls, telling myself I was just maintaining excellence. But really, I was scared. Scared that someone would see through all the achievements to the real person underneath and find not enough. Elijah listened without judgment. So I turned love into a competition. Something that could be measured, evaluated, controlled. But you playing the way you did showed me that love isn't about perfection. It's about vulnerability, about giving, about loving someone so much that you'd give up your dreams for them. She looked at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. I don't know if I'm capable of that, but for the first time in my life, I want to find out. I want to try. Elijah was silent for a long moment, considering her words. "Vivian," he finally said, "I'm not the answer to your loneliness. I'm still grieving my wife. Part of me will always love her, always miss her. That's not something I can turn off or get over." "I know." But, he continued, "I also know that Grace wouldn't want me to freeze the rest of my life. She told me that before she died in one of our last conversations. If something happens to me," she said, "promise me you won't shut down. Promise me you'll let Sarah see you living, not just surviving." He took a deep breath. "I didn't keep that promise for 5 years. But last night when I played, I felt like I was finally starting to keep it. And part of that is opening up to possibility. Not marriage, not rushing, not immediate romance, but friendship, connection, seeing what happens." Vivian nodded, feeling like a weight had just been lifted from her chest. He wasn't rejecting her. He was just setting realistic, healthy boundaries. "I can live with that," she said. "Actually, I think that's exactly what I need. Not an answer, not a solution, just someone to walk alongside." "Okay," he said with a smile. "Walk alongside. I can do that." She smiled back, and for the first time in years it felt completely authentic. The next day, the story about Elijah's new position was announced. The reaction was overwhelming. Students were thrilled. Faculty supportive. Parents, initially skeptical about hiring a janitor without formal teaching credentials, gradually shifted to support once they watched the performance video and understood the story. Elijah's first class was scheduled for 3 weeks later. He would teach a small class of advanced piano students in the afternoons after regular school hours ended. In the meantime, he continued his janitorial work, though his hours were reduced. He liked the normalcy of it, the way it kept him grounded. Some of his colleagues had started treating him differently, like a celebrity rather than a coworker, and that made him uncomfortable. Marcus, his security guard friend, was the only one who seemed unchanged. "Man, I always knew there was something special about you," Marcus said one night when they were having lunch together. "But I didn't know you could play like that." "Why didn't you ever say it wasn't relevant?" Elijah said. "And honestly, I didn't think I still could. 5 years is a long time to not touch an instrument. But you did play. I heard you sometimes at night. I never said anything because it seemed private, you know, but I'd walk past the concert hall and hear music and think, that must be a recording. Never thought it was you." Elijah smiled. "Thanks for not saying anything. I needed those hours. It was like therapy." "So what about this pretty professor?" Marcus asked with a wink. "I saw the way she looked at you. And the way you looked at her." "It's not like that," Elijah protested, but he felt his face warming. "Uh-huh. Keep telling yourself that. But I'll tell you something, brother. Grace would want you happy. She wouldn't want you lonely forever." "I know. But it's early. Everything is happening too fast. Maybe. Or maybe right on time. Just don't shut down, okay? Don't let fear keep you from something good." Elijah nodded, appreciating the wisdom, however gruff. 3 weeks passed in a blur. Elijah prepared for his first class, anxious in ways he hadn't expected. Playing once before an audience was one thing. Teaching, shaping young minds, being responsible for their development was something entirely different. Vivian had helped him prepare, meeting him to plan lessons together. At first, these meetings were tense, formal. Both of them careful about boundaries. But gradually, as they talked about music, about pedagogy, about their philosophies, something shifted. They started laughing together, sharing stories. Vivian told about her childhood, about her strict father, and the loneliness of growing up a prodigy. Elijah shared memories of Grace, the first time he talked about her with someone outside family without feeling like his chest was being torn open. And Vivian listened, truly listened, not trying to fix or solve, just being present with his pain. One afternoon, when they were working on an assignment for students, Sarah showed up. Elijah had brought her to the office after school, having nowhere else for her to go. "Dad." "I finished my homework," she announced, appearing at the door. Vivian turned and for the first time saw Elijah's daughter. She was a small girl with big eyes like her father's and carefully braided hair. "I'm sure you did," Elijah said with a smile. "Sarah, this is Professor Ashford. Vivian, this is my daughter Sarah." Sarah looked at Vivian with undisguised curiosity. "You're the one who made my dad play piano in front of people." "I guess I am," Vivian said, kneeling down to be at eye level with the girl. "I hope that's okay." "Yeah. Mom would have liked it. She always said Dad should play for people. But Dad was scared after Mom died." The simple honesty of it made Vivian catch her breath. I can understand why that would be scary." Sarah tilted her head, studying Vivian. "You're pretty. And Dad says you play piano really, really good. Can you teach me?" Sarah Elijah intervened, surprised. "That's not polite to ask." "Why not?" Sarah asked innocently. "You're teaching other people? Why not me?" Vivian laughed a real laugh, warm and genuine, that Elijah had never heard from her before. "You know what I think I'd like that, but only if your dad agrees." Elijah looked between his daughter and Vivian, seeing something in their interaction that made his chest feel warm and painful at the same time. "We'll see," he said, but his voice had softened. Sarah beamed and ran back to hug her dad. "Thank you, Daddy." Then, without waiting, she turned back to Vivian. "Mom played violin. Do you play violin?" "No, just piano." "That's okay then. You and Dad can play together, like Dad and Mom used to." The simplicity of the statement hung in the air. Vivian looked at Elijah, unsure how to respond. But Elijah just smiled, a slightly sad but genuine smile. "Maybe we can, sweetheart. Maybe we can." And in that moment, Vivian understood that this simple acceptance from an 8-year-old child meant more than any professional approval she could receive. If Sarah could see her not as someone who had caused her father pain, but as someone who could be part of their lives, then maybe there was hope. Maybe, just maybe, she could learn to do this. How to connect. How to love without armor. How to be human. The first snow of the season was falling gently outside the windows of the concert hall as Berkshire Academy prepared for their annual gala once again. But this year, everything was different. The program had been redesigned. Instead of just a fundraising event with guest performances, it had become a showcase of students and faculty, a celebration of what music could be when approached with both rigor and heart. Elijah stood backstage, adjusting his tie nervously. This was the first time he'd worn a suit in years, and it felt strange, both comfortable and uncomfortable at once. Vivian found him there, beautiful in a midnight blue dress that made her eyes luminous. "Nervous?" she asked softly. "Terrified," he admitted. "Playing solo is one thing. Playing a duet with someone is completely different. We've practiced," she reminded him. "Every day for 2 weeks. You know your part in your sleep. It's not about the notes. It's about everything else. All the people watching, the expectations, the memory of last time." Vivian placed a hand on his arm. "Elijah, look at me." He did. Last time was about a lonely man and a lonely woman, both closed off in different ways. Tonight is about 2 people who've learned how to open up. That's a different story. And I think it's a beautiful one. He took a deep breath, nodding. "You're right. I just don't want to let you down." "You can't," she said simply. "The worst that can happen is we make a mistake. And if we do, we'll laugh about it later, and remember that music isn't about perfection." He smiled, feeling some of the tension leave him. When did you get so wise?" "Since a janitor taught me I didn't know everything," she said with a wink. One of their students, Emily, peeked in. "Professor Ashford, Mr. Carter, they're ready for you." "Okay," Vivian said. "Let's go." They stepped onto the stage together, and this time there were no gasps or murmurs. The audience knew they were coming. They had been waiting for this moment. The concert hall was packed. Students, faculty, parents, community members, and media. But in the front row, in the seat of honor, sat Sarah, beside her grandmother Marcus, the security guard friend, and Dr. Morrison. Elijah caught his daughter's eye, and she gave him a thumbs up and a smile so big it made everything else fade away. He and Vivian sat at the piano bench together, preparing to play the four-hand arrangement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 that they had spent weeks perfecting. Before they began, Vivian turned to the audience. "6 months ago, I stood on this stage and issued a challenge." Her voice was clear, no trace of the old anxiety. "I thought I was testing others. Really, I was the one being tested." She looked at Elijah, her expression soft. "The man beside me taught me that music isn't about being better than others. It's about being true to yourself and open to others. About allowing yourself to be vulnerable. Allowing yourself to feel. Allowing yourself to connect." She turned back to the audience. "Tonight, we're not playing to prove anything. We're playing to share something. To show you what we've found in these past months working together, teaching together, learning to trust each other." She paused, a small smile pulling at the corner of her mouth. "And perhaps to show you that change is possible, that we can learn, that it's never too late to open your heart." Gentle applause rippled through the audience, and Elijah and Vivian turned back to the piano. Their hands hovered over the keys. "Ready," she whispered. "With you?" "Yes." And they began. The opening chords were played not by one person now, but by both their hands interwoven, creating a richer, fuller sound. It was a metaphor for everything they had become together, two voices that harmonized instead of competed. As they played, it was clear that this wasn't the same performance from 6 months ago. This wasn't a showcase of a hidden genius. It was a dialogue between two musicians who had learned to listen to each other, to support each other, to create something bigger than either of them could alone. Vivian's technical precision was still there, but now it was infused with a warmth that hadn't been before. Elijah's emotional depth remained, but now it was balanced by a sense of joy, of hope, of looking forward instead of just back. Together, they created something new. Sarah watched from the front row, eyes wide with wonder. This was her father, yes, but different somehow. Lighter, happier. And the woman beside him, the one with the pretty smile, made him laugh at rehearsals, treated him like an equal, talked to Sarah like she mattered. Maybe Sarah thought with wisdom beyond her years. Maybe this was what moving forward looked like. Not forgetting Mom, but letting new people in. Not replacing, but adding. The performance continued, and with each measure, it became more apparent that this was not just a musical partnership. There was chemistry between them, a connection that transcended the notes on the page. The way they anticipated each other's movements. How Elijah would lean slightly to give Vivian more room for a passage, how she would adjust her dynamics to let his melody sing. They were dancing with 88 keys as their floor. The audience felt it. You could see it in their faces, the way they leaned forward, the way some held the hands of loved ones beside them, the way others wiped away tears. Because this wasn't just about music. It was about human connection, about finding each other in unexpected places, about second chances and new beginnings. As the concerto built to its climax, Elijah and Vivian were playing with complete abandon, now lost in the music in the moment, in the joy of creating something beautiful together. And when the final chord sounded, when the last note faded into silence, there was a beat of perfect stillness. Then the audience erupted. Standing ovation, immediate and thunderous. But this time it felt different. It wasn't about shock or surprise. It was about celebration. Elijah and Vivian stood turning to face the audience, and for the first time, they were holding hands. It was a simple gesture, natural, and it spoke volumes. Sarah was the first to reach the stage, running up the steps and throwing her arms around her father. "Dad, that was beautiful, and you and Miss Vivian played like you were one person." Elijah picked her up, holding her tight. "You think Mom would have liked it?" Sarah pulled back, looking into his eyes with seriousness. "I think Mom loved it, and I think she'd be happy you're smiling again." Vivian stood to one side, giving them their moment, but Sarah reached out and grabbed her hand, pulling her into the embrace. "You too," Sarah said firmly. "You're part of this." And Vivian, who had spent a lifetime building walls, who had armored herself with perfection, who had been too scared to let anyone truly see her, found herself crying openly, arms around this man and his daughter, feeling like she finally understood what home meant. Principal Jameson approached with a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all witnessed something special tonight. Not just a virtuoso performance, but a demonstration of what happens when people allow themselves to be vulnerable, to grow, to change." He turned to Elijah and Vivian. 6 months ago, we hired Mr. Carter as a co-instructor. It was a somewhat controversial decision. But in those 6 months, our music program has been transformed. Student engagement is up. Applications to the program have tripled. And more importantly, students are learning that music is not just about technical mastery. It's about humanity. Applause again. I'd like to announce tonight that we're establishing a permanent position, the Grace Carter Memorial Chair, in piano performance, and Mr. Elijah Carter will be its first holder. Elijah looked stunned, and now he was the one crying. Additionally, the principal continued. Professor Vivian Ashford has been named head of the entire music department in recognition of her leadership and her growth as both teacher and artist. More applause, and Vivian looked equally overwhelmed. But then the principal smiled a knowing smile. "And one more thing. We've been approached by several music foundations interested in the work you two are doing. They'd like to fund a program that brings music education to underserved communities using the model you and Mr. Carter have developed, a program that emphasizes both technical excellence and emotional authenticity. Would you be interested in leading such a program?" Elijah and Vivian looked at each other, and in that look was an entire conversation. Could they do this work together even more closely? Take on something this ambitious, but also think about the students they could reach, the lives they could change, the music they could share. "Yes," they said simultaneously, then laughed. "We'd be honored," Vivian added. As the event wound down and guests filtered out, Elijah found a moment alone with Vivian backstage. "Quite a night," he said with understatement. "Quite 6 months," she corrected. "Vivian, I need to say something." She turned to him, expression open, waiting. "When you first made that challenge, I thought you were the most arrogant, closed-off person I'd ever met." She winced, but he continued. "But what I've learned is that your armor wasn't about superiority. It was about fear, and watching you dismantle it piece by piece, watching you learn to be vulnerable, to be real, has been one of the most inspiring things I've ever witnessed." He took a breath. "Grace was the love of my life. She always will be in a way. But she also taught me that love isn't finite. It doesn't run out. And keeping my heart closed doesn't honor her memory. Living honors her. Loving again honors her." Vivian's eyes filled with tears. "I'm not asking for anything," Elijah said quickly. "We're partners, friends, colleagues. That's enough. That's wonderful. But I wanted you to know that you've changed my life. You've helped me find my way back to music, back to myself. And if sometime in the future this friendship becomes something more, well, I'd be open to that." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, and Elijah worried he'd said too much, pushed too hard. But then she spoke, her voice steady, despite the tears. "I've never been good at this. At being honest about feelings. I always thought emotions were weakness, that vulnerability was a liability. But you've shown me the opposite is true." She stepped closer. "Elijah Carter, you're the most real person I've ever known. And yes, I'd like to see where this goes. Not rushed, not forced, but gradually, naturally. Learning each other, growing together." She smiled through her tears. "Grace sounds like she was an incredible woman. And I'm honored that you'd even consider opening your heart again. I don't want to replace her. Couldn't if I tried. But maybe, just maybe, there's room for something new alongside those memories." "There is," Elijah said softly. "There definitely is." They stood there, not quite embracing, not quite apart in the space between what was and what could be. And that was exactly where they needed to be. 1 year later. The concert hall of Berkshire Academy buzzed with energy. The annual gala had become one of the most anticipated events on Boston's cultural calendar, not for donors or prestige, but for the music itself. On stage, Elijah stood with Sarah, now 9 years old, and taking her first bow after performing a simple Clementi sonatina. Vivian had been her teacher, and the pride in both their faces was unmistakable. As Sarah ran off stage into her grandmother's arms, Elijah approached the microphone. "A year ago tonight," he began, "I was a janitor in this building, invisible to most people, hiding from life, from music, from the possibility of joy after loss." He paused, looking out at the packed hall. Then someone issued a challenge. An arrogant challenge, as she herself has admitted. But sometimes arrogance is just fear wearing a mask. And sometimes challenges come at exactly the moment we need them, even if we don't know it yet. Vivian joined him on stage, and he took her hand naturally, easily. "This woman taught me that it's never too late to step back into the light. And I'd like to think I taught her something too. That the walls we build to protect ourselves eventually become prisons. And the only way out is to tear them down brick by brick." He looked at her, and the smile they shared was intimate despite hundreds of eyes watching. "Now we work together, teach together," and he paused, a grin breaking through. "As of tonight, we've decided to try living together too." Gasps and applause and a few squeals from students who'd been shipping them since day one. Vivian took the microphone, laughing. "Yes, fine. He's finally making an honest woman of me," she joked. "But seriously, a year ago tonight I made a promise I couldn't keep. I said I'd marry whoever could play the concerto perfectly. Elijah played it beautifully. But marriage isn't a prize to be won. It's a partnership to be built." She squeezed his hand. "And so tonight, not in challenge, but in love. Not in arrogance, but in humility. And not because of piano playing, but because of the heart behind it, I'm making a different promise." She turned to him, and from the pocket of her dress, she pulled out a small box. The audience went completely silent. "Elijah Carter, you taught me that sometimes the woman should be the one to ask. So, will you marry me?" Elijah laughed, tears streaming down his face. That's supposed to be my line. Too slow, she teased. I've spent a lifetime being afraid. I'm done waiting. Then it's yes, he said, pulling her into an embrace as the audience erupted. Yes to partnership, yes to adventure, yes to whatever comes next. They kissed, and the concert hall shook with applause and cheers. Sarah ran back on stage, throwing her arms around both of them. Does this mean Miss Vivian is my mom now if you want me to be, Vivian? Said, kneeling down to face her. I could never replace your mother. She was first, and she was irreplaceable. But maybe I could be second. Different, but real. Would that be okay? Sarah considered this with the seriousness that always marked her understanding beyond her years. I think Mom would like you, she said finally. You make Daddy play piano, and you make him laugh, and you're teaching me music. So yes. Second Mom sounds perfect. There wasn't a dry eye in the house. As the evening concluded and guests departed, Elijah stood alone in the concert hall one final time as a janitor. Tomorrow he'd turn in his keys to the cleaning closet for the last time. He was faculty now fully, completely. No more split identity. But he'd miss the quiet solitude of the empty hall, the piano waiting in darkness. Vivian found him there. Having second thoughts. No, just saying goodbye to the old life, honoring it. It was a good life, she said. You were a good father, good worker, good man. Surviving life, he corrected. Good life starts now. He turned to the piano one last time, and they sat together playing Rachmaninoff once more. But this time when they finished, there was no applause, no audience. Just them, the music, and the promise of all the tomorrows ahead. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering Boston in white, making everything new. And in the concert hall of Berkshire Academy, where a janitor had once hidden in shadows, and a professor had armored herself with perfection. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely way, began the next chapter of a story not even they could have written. Because sometimes the greatest performances happen when we least expect them. Sometimes the person who changes our life is the one we never noticed. And sometimes a challenge meant to prove superiority becomes an invitation to discover humility, vulnerability, and love. All because one man had the courage to step from the shadows. And one woman had the courage to admit she was wrong. Together, they discovered they were both finally exactly right.